Hello everyone. This is our second uh, course segment, which is about basic communication models. As I said earlier, we have already discussed it in the classroom, but I thought since we are going virtual, not virtual, online, so it's good that I repeat those. So one of these is the Laswell model. There are only four models. Basically, let me cite those. One of them is Shannon Weaver. So the earliest one are Harold Laswell's model, Laswell formula, which is well known. We discussed it endlessly. It is considered to be the most important one because it's the first ever communication model developed after the Second World War. Earliest communication models, which has a couple of very simple components: who says what through what channel to who with what possible effects. Now it gives us an idea of how communication begins and how it takes place, but it's very simplistic. This model was made a bit better, by Braddock, who added three small components. Since this model already thinks that the way it explains that the beginner of information, like who, already has a complete idea of what he, she, or it is transmitting. But as we know that communication is an unending process. And let me quote with Bashram himself. When he says this will give us a better understanding of what the communication process is. So here is Shram. So find it. This is what he said. He said in 1954 that in fact it is misleading to think of communication process as starting somewhere and ending somewhere. It is really endless. We are little switchboard centers holding and rerouting the great endless current of information. But this is a later comment coming from Wilbur Shaw. Harold Laswell's model is different. Harold Laswell's model deals in a linear way. It was made better by Braddock, who introduced the circumstances under which a communication process takes place, and also what purpose does it serve, what does it do, like why do people communicate? It's always important. Like me communicating with you right now has a purpose. Both of us know the purpose. If we don't know the purpose, it's just useless. The same communication given to somebody else, like for example, an English student given the same course will understand the language, but they would never understand why is this being directed to them, because they don't have any course with the same idea. So the purpose is always important, and the effects, like not simply feedback, but the effects. How does the communication process affects others, and how does it affect all the people in the process, like the source, the destination of the information, and everything. So that's one model. These are the earliest communication models in which Harold Laswell's model is always discussed. Then we come to Shannon Weaver and Osgood's models. Now, Shannon Weaver has a model that we know as the mathematical model of communication. As their work was, they were focused on finding noise sources in a telephone communication process, and that's why they were looking at what we see as a process where they were after the problems in a communication process, and these problems were transmission problems. So they were focused on channels of communication. For them, it was like it was always about where does a noise enter a communication process, a physical noise enter, and how does it affect reception of a message. So most of the time, the mathematical model of communication, if you go to the page and look at it, is based on the source of information, message, the way it's transmitted, and the transmitter signal and the noise source, and then its receiver and message, and then destination. So that's the process. Shannon viewer model explains the chain of communication. How does it take place? And it identifies where could it physically be disrupted, not mentally. It's always about the physical coverage of a communication process. So it's more about the channels. Like it talks about the message and signal. So when the message is transmitted, it becomes a signal. When it's received, it is again transformed into a message. Like for example, a binary code while reaching through internet to you becomes a voice or a word. And then in the end, what they try to explain is that the last part of it is that message is transformed into meanings. So whenever you get a message through any medium which is electronic, for example, or which is not human, you will go through a process where you don't really know. You hear the voice, for example, on a telephone, and then you get the binary code, and then that binary code is signaled to you. It's transformed into a message. But when you get the message, you form the meaning. Like you get kind of 10, 15 or 20, 2,000 news every day, and then you decide what meanings these might have. Like in the present context, you might be getting conflicting news about the viral infection that people are going through, and you'll see that many people died, or that many people got affected. So that's bad news. And then somebody also gives you the news that many people are well now. They have been discharged from hospitals. Not yet. There is no cure, but people are getting better. And then you say, okay, there is hope or despair. So both options are with you. You get the information. You decide to give meaning. You decide to give meaning and be hopeful. You decide to give meaning and be depressed. It's everybody's choice, So that's then we move to the other model. I'm not giving them too much time because I think that we already know that. So I don't hold to those. This was the addition to Shannon and Weaver model by Melvin DeFleur. Melvin DeFleur introduced the idea of meaning into a communication process. So he made the mathematical model of communication, which was very technical. He gave it a human aspect, like what do we do with the message? We form meanings out of those messages when we get those. So then we come to Osgood and Schramm. You have these images also in front of you, the Osgood and Schramm formula. It's a simple one. It's the most important thing is that message is in the center, and Schramm and Osgood try to explain the actors in a communication process. Like Shannon and Weaver were more focused on channels. DeFleur give it a bit of humanity, and then Osgood and Schramm were more preoccupied with the process of encoding, interpreting, and transmitting, as I think, yeah. So you have an encoder, an interpreter, and a decoder, and then you have a decoder, interpreter, and an encoder. Avoid the complications. The simple thing is that what Osgood and Schramm were doing was, instead of knowing the technological aspects, they were looking at the behavioral aspect of a communication process, which is that how do people take the message and send the message. So whenever you want to send a message, you encode it in a language, for example, which is understandable. Right now I can speak a language which both of us understand, so this is the encoding process. And then comes the what do we call the transmitter process. So you transmit it like we are doing right now through the camera, voice and image both, and then when it reaches the person who receives the information, the person decodes it, and then it interprets it again, what's the meaning, and then encodes it again as a feedback process. So this is a circular, unending process. The code that I mentioned earlier, it's the same. So these are kind of simple models which are interconnected to each other. And then we have the last one, it's Dan's helical model. It's an interesting model which gives you an upward spiral. It's really interesting that the difference between this and the earlier model is that this is a model which is dynamic, which is not frozen or static. The spiral, the way a spiral expands, it means that when you give information, so if you are into a discussion, if you are into a communication process, you are continuously giving and taking information which is expanding your horizon. Like it's expanding the very nature of the debate, and that's very important. Like it's a dynamic process. Through communication, we understand more and more. So that's one of the central processes of communication, like expanding the knowledge store of individuals or groups involved in a communication process. That's what it does. The problem with such models is that on both sides of the communication there might be an information gap. Like if I'm speaking to you, I believe that my last video was seen and understood, and then I'll just begin from that, and it might not be true for everybody. So for that very reason we make the messages redundant. We add information that we have already explained. Why? Because some important aspects are missed by some people. So for that very reason you always try to make up for that loss in adding that information again. For some amongst you, when you receive this information, it might be redundant because you say this is already said. But for me, I have to keep in mind that there isn't an information gap, that those who might not be able to get the gist of information in the beginning or in the last lecture, they should again get in touch. And that's the heuristic value of communication. Basically, that's why we study models, because we always learn from the processes. It's not about rote learning the lines and words, but it's like the growth of the processes, like understanding that what is the basic communication model doing. The basic communication model is giving you what we call a linear understanding of the process. It is identifying the actors, like last week, and then somebody tries to explain, no, it's not that simple. Let's add a few things to it. Let's add context. Let's add how it affects. Let's add what is the purpose of communication. And then we get into another subject where we see Shannon and we were trying to understand noise, like if I speak and there is some physical noise and you are at a distant place, so you won't get it. The reason that we are not having virtual classes, instead of that we are recording lectures, is because we are aware of the fact that communication might be broken, each and every person amongst you might not have access, and we don't want anybody to be left behind. So instead of doing virtual, which some of you might think that is very useful, we are going for this one. So this is how it works. At the end, we are taking care of information gaps, and we are also cognizant of the nature of conversations which expand through communication. So please watch the video, and I hope that there are questions, I hope there is understanding. So I would like to have a balance, that you get something out of it and also that you have more questions. I'll respond to the questions. There are no stupid questions, so please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.